At what age is a child ready to inherit? It's a question many parents and grandparents ask, particularly when the child is still a young adult. Now, one option families could consider is something called staggered distribution. Joining us now to explain how it works and what to think about is Mindy Bannock, tax and estate planner at TD Wealth. Mindy, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Great conversation. I'm very interested in this myself, having kids who are young adults. Let's talk about the staggered distribution. Let's break down the term first. What are we actually talking about here?
So a staggered distribution is really an estate planning tool that we utilize so that parents are not necessarily distributing one lump sum at that point in time. So you're really staging it over a period of time, over a period of stages, over a period of amounts. We frequently see it in the context of minors and young adults. You know, typically most parents do not want to be distributing a significant amount of wealth to their, 18 or 19-year-old, which is the age of majority depending on the province that you're in. Because let's be honest, how many 18 or 19-year-olds are really financially mature and responsible at that age to receive a significant amount of wealth? So a staggered distribution is one strategy that parents can think about. And for illustration purposes, what we frequently see is parents, let's say, distributing a third of the estate at age 25, a third of the estate at age 30, the remainder at 35. Hopefully by the time they turn 35, they're of a financial maturity where it makes sense for them to inherit the vast majority of wealth. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, it's going to be child-specific, age-specific. Ultimately, what it really depends upon is you want to intentionally choose the right stages, the right milestones that is appropriate for your child so that when they are in a position of making financial choices, they are financially mature.
Right, so when people start to wade into these waters, and I like that idea of staggered distribution, they start hearing words like trust, and they think it has to be set up now. How does this actually work when it's written into a will?
So when it's written into a will, it's not that you're funding or creating the trust today. What you're really doing is you're creating instructions and including terms in your will that will perhaps be created upon your passing, but only if it is needed. So for example, when we use that type of, either a staggered distribution or let's say you include age 30 as the age that your beneficiaries need to attain. Your kids may be lower than that age today, so a trust perhaps is needed, but you're not creating the trust today. You're going to wait until you pass away. And if when you pass away, your children are under the age of 30, then yes, at that point in time, a trust will be funded and created. But if your children are above the age of 30, a trust is not needed. So again, a trust is not created today in your will. You just include instructions. And one last point I want to highlight is even if you have children today where you don't necessarily think that you need a trust, we frequently see a lot of for contingency planning where you put in place, if something happens to my child, then I want their children, meaning your grandchildren, to inherit. So I always tell clients if there's any possibility that any minor or young adult could potentially inherit from your estate, whether that's a primary beneficiary or a contingent beneficiary, you want to include that trust language. Again, it allows for a lot of planning flexibility.
Now, parents may worry about what happens to an inheritance if their child goes through a separation. Is there anything they or their kids could do to protect it?
So I think this is really about educating children about what they can do and cannot do and how a child handles the money after they receive it. And it depends on, the context. We typically talk about, protection status, that parents want to protect the money in case their children end up in a divorce, end up separating from a spouse. So is there anything that a parent can do? Is there anything that a child can do? And primarily we recommend the key thing that you want to be thinking about is keeping an inheritance separate from a spouse. If the child takes that inheritance and either pays down a mortgage to a family home, pays the down payment, anything, that transfers that inheritance into a family home, it can become a little bit complicated where that money may no longer be considered, let's call it protected or separate upon a division in a separation situation. We're talking typically with legally married spouses. It's a little bit different if it's a common law partner. They might still have a claim, but it's not exactly the same with legally married spouses. Another scenario where we might see inheritance, may have to be distributed to upon a separation is where a child includes that money in a joint account. It's not the act of putting the inheritance in a joint account, it's the commingling where you can't really trace it or identify that it's truly an inheritance. So from a parent's perspective, you want to educate your children that how your child should use the money. Again, if the sole goal is protecting it from a spouse upon a separation.
I like that idea of educating the children, because these aren't discussions that sometimes people feel comfortable having. Either it's about money or it's about death. These are the things usually we don't throw it at the dinner table. What are some of the other ways you can start that education about, around inheritance?
I frequently find that this is such an overlooked aspect of estate planning, and yet it is so important because, again, if your child inherits and is surprised about this huge inheritance, they may not be able to manage the money well. So what are some tools that we can recommend to clients? One is you want to start having that conversation and communicating with your children about money. Obviously, it's going to be, child-specific, age-specific, but when you can start having those conversations, I tend to find that a lot of parents may feel uncomfortable about telling their children how much money they have. And I can acknowledge that. It may feel uncomfortable, and you don't, as a parent, need to tell your children how much money you own. I think what's more important is having a conversation surrounding how you make the money choices that you do. So why you're investing in certain investments, how you manage risk, what are your financial goals. These are really where the learning happens, and you can start educating your children, as well as you may want to give some real life learning opportunities for your children. Start gifting small amounts today. If your child is of the age of majority and they can open up their own TFSA account. As a parent, you may want to consider start contributing to your children or grandchildren's TFSA account. It allows your child to start investing with probably a little bit low risk. It's, better if your child makes a smaller, mistake today than a larger mistake later on. And again, just going back to that idea that educating your children, I think it's less important so much about the number and more important about why you're making the choices that you do.
Now, when we talk about inheritance, some people will wonder, is there a tax on inheritance? The parents and the grandparents, is there an inheritance tax?
So the short answer is here in Canada, we do not have an inheritance tax. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a tax at death. We do. Here in Canada, we do have this concept of a deemed disposition at death, which does mean that upon a person's passing, all of their assets will be deemed to be disposed of. You will have to pay capital gain tax rates on any of the appreciated assets that you have. So there is a tax, but we do not here in Canada refer to it as an inheritance tax. I think a lot of people hear this idea because in other foreign countries there is an inheritance tax. And I just want to highlight, if you have any sort of cross-border connection, whether that's asset or ties, you may want to just talk to somebody, an advisor, about whether or not it could affect you. But again, from a Canadian perspective, Canada does not have an inheritance tax.